What you're about to hear is not an urban legend. It's not a tale to scare children. It's a real case, documented, and to this day, unexplained. Are you brave enough to listen to the end? Then leave a like, comment right now, "I'm ready," and subscribe to the channel, because what starts here doesn't end when the video finishes. The case of Anneliese Michel, Germany, 1976. It was the year 1976, and the small town of Klingenberg in Bavaria, Germany, was known for its tranquil landscapes, Baroque churches, and the leisurely pace of life of its residents. But that summer, something dark took over the city, attracting the attention of the media, the church, and the justice. The name that echoed between whispers and prayers was Anneliese Michel. Anneliese was a 23-year-old young woman, raised in a deeply Catholic family. Shy, studious, and dedicated, she was the portrait of the ideal daughter. But behind the serene gaze, something grew in silence. At the age of 16, after a series of unexplained fainting, she was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. Treatment was started, but the symptoms evolved into something that medicine could not explain. Anneliese began to report disturbing visions. Demonic faces appeared among the shadows of the room, even with all the lights on. Voices whispered in dead tongues during the night, and the constant feeling of being watched by invisible eyes prevented her from sleeping. She said that at night she was dragged from bed by invisible hands, felt claws pressing against her neck, and woke up with purple marks on her body. Doctors attributed it all to epilepsy and psychosis, increasing the doses of antipsychotic medications. But the more the drugs were adjusted, the more intense and violent the episodes became. Her parents, Anna and Joseph Michel, watched helplessly as their daughter transformed. The girl who used to pray the rosary daily began to shout during masses, destroy crucifixes, and refuse food, saying that demons would not allow it. On some nights, she was seen walking down the aisle on all fours, howling like a wild animal, her eyes completely dark. Over time, his body bent into unnatural postures, and his voice took on masculine, animalistic tones. It was as if multiple entities spoke for her. The Catholic Church, initially skeptical, ended up being convinced after several priests witnessed the phenomena. Objects moved by themselves in Anneliese's presence. Bibles burned spontaneously. Two priests, Ernstalt and Arnold Rentz, were allowed to begin the ritual of exorcism. Between September 1975 and July 1976, 67 rituals were performed, all documented in audio. The disturbing recordings showed Anneliese screaming, growling and speaking in names that sounded more like ancient evocations: Cain, Judas, Nero, Hitler, and Lucifer. The audios revealed something beyond human comprehension. Overlapping voices, sarcastic laughter that echoed as if coming from deep caves, screams that seemed not to come from a human throat, and long periods without any basic physiological need. She refused water, food, and remained in genuflection for hours until the bones in her knees broke. His eyes, once sweet, became glassy, and his skin, marked by bruises, bites, and open wounds, exuded a smell of burning flesh, according to the testimonies of those present. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel died. His body weighed only 30 kilograms. The death certificate pointed to malnutrition and extreme dehydration. The tragedy shook Germany, and soon the parents and the two priests were put on trial for negligent homicide. The court divided opinions. On the one hand, those who saw the case as a medical failure and religious fanaticism. On the other, those who believed that Anneliese really was a victim of demonic possession. During the trial, excerpts from the recordings were played, causing discomfort in the room. One of the judges even fainted. Another refused to return the next day. The defense argued that Anneliese had requested the exorcisms and that she herself rejected the medicine, claiming that she was suffering for other sinners. In one of the recordings, her voice can be clearly heard changing pitch, as if there were 6 different entities talking at the same time. The case was closed with a light sentence, 6 months in prison on probation for the 4 accused. But for many, Anneliese Michel's story never ended. His last requests, said between screams and tears, echo to this day in documentaries and obscure internet forums. Beg forgiveness for me, they're still here. And so, in the small town of Klingenberg, the Michel family home remains standing, abandoned, silent, but never really empty, say the residents. Some swear to hear whispered prayers on cold nights. Others, guttural laughter in the middle of nowhere. The windows sometimes close tightly on windless nights. And dogs, as they pass in front, retreat with their fur bristling and their tails between their legs. What really happened to Anneliese Michel? A collapsing mind, a victim of medical errors and blind faith? Or a soul torn apart by forces we don't understand? The answer may lie in the tapes, locked in archives, and in the eyes of those who dare to listen to the end. But beware, they say that once heard, the voices continue, even after the recording ends. The possession of Roland Doe, USA, 1949. In the suburbs of Cottage City, Maryland, the year was 1949, and an uncomfortable silence surrounded one house in particular. During the day, everything seemed normal. Sidewalks swept, neighbors exchanging greetings, children playing in the street. But at night, that colonial-style residence plunged into a darkness that seemed alive, as if something was watching through the walls. Roland Doe, a fictitious name used to protect his identity, was 13 years old when it all began. An introspective, family-cling and lonely boy, he spent most of his time with his Aunt Harriet, an eccentric woman interested in the occult and spiritualism. It was she who introduced him to the use of the Ouija board as an innocent game. But something about that contact was different. Shortly after Harriet's sudden death, strange events began to occur inside the house. Scratching noises coming from inside the walls, furniture that moved by itself, objects that levitated in front of witnesses. The crucifix on Roland's bed has been found upside down more than once. During the night, the boy woke up screaming, saying that something was pulling him by the feet, and whispered his name in voices that came from all corners of the room. Over time, the phenomena ceased to be just external. Roland's skin began to show scratches, and words like hell, hate, and death appeared marked on his chest and back, as if they were burned alive in his flesh. An odor of sulfur permeated the room as he entered the rooms, and domestic animals hid or went mad in his presence. The family, desperate, sought medical help, but all the tests came back normal. The psychiatrist could not explain the injuries or the reports. The situation was completely out of reason. It was then that the Catholic Church was called. Father Edward Hughes was the first to attempt to intervene, conducting an impromptu exorcism ritual in a Jesuit hospital. During the ritual, Roland broke one of the stretcher's ties and, with a metallic piece, seriously injured the priest's arm. The case was passed on to 2 other religious, Father William Bowden and Assistant Walter Halloran. For weeks, the 2 performed dozens of exorcism sessions in different locations, from the family home to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis. Witnesses reported that the bed where Roland was tied shook violently, and his voice changed completely, taking on serious and threatening tones. He spoke languages he had never studied, uttered blasphemies, and sometimes his body arched grotesquely as if his bones were about to break. During one of the sessions, a crucifix was thrown violently against the wall, shattering. In another, a light went out on its own, and the room plunged into bitter cold, despite the spring heat outside. The ground shook as if something crawled beneath the boards, and voices echoed without origin, repeating, "He is ours." In the final session, according to church records, something changed. Roland, in a deep trance, would have shouted in Latin a phrase that one did not expect to hear: "Dominate, release me. Lord, free me." Soon after that, he fell unconscious. When he woke up, he seemed to remember nothing. The phenomena suddenly ceased. The case was filed by the church as an authentic exorcism, but those who were present never forgot. Some priests involved died a few years later, victims of sudden illnesses. Others have abandoned their vocations altogether. The house where it all began remains standing to this day, and neighbors still report from time to time hearing the sound of nails being scratched against the walls at night. Roland Doe's story would inspire, years later, the famous book The Exorcist and the movie that immortalized him. But the real facts, darker and less romanticized, remain as one of the most disturbing records of the presence of the inexplicable among us. And those who listen to the reports until the end inevitably feel the same question arise: what if he had never been released? The Exorcism of Clara Germana Kelly, South Africa, 1906. Natal, South Africa. The year was 1906, and the convent of the Mission of St. Michael, located in a remote region and surrounded by dense forests, was considered a sanctuary of peace, prayer, and discipline. Dozens of young African converts to Catholicism lived there, among them a 16-year-old teenager named Clara Germana Seller. Her presence until then was discreet, an ordinary girl, orphaned from an early age, sheltered by the nuns since she was 4 years old. But something changed in Clara, and when it did, no one could ignore it. Reports say that it all started with small tantrums during prayer times. She would murmur rambling words, refuse to touch sacred objects, and at night she was heard crying in a strange language that no one on the mission understood. One day, during confession, Claire would have said to the Mother Superior in an icy tone, "He is inside me. I let him." In the following weeks, the phenomena intensified. Clara writhed as if something inside her was struggling to escape. Her physical strength became enormous, even throwing heavy furniture and holding back 3 adult nuns alone. Witnesses swear that she levitated for several seconds, rising more than a meter from the ground, with her body rigid and her eyes completely white. During the episodes, she spoke fluently in languages she had never studied: German, French, Polish, and even Syro-Aramaic. His voice changed abruptly, becoming deep and guttural, as if he were an adult man or sometimes more than one entity speaking simultaneously. In these moments, Claire revealed intimate secrets of other young women in the convent, information that she could not have known by natural means. One night, she accurately described an ancient sin of the Mother Superiors, which occurred decades before Claire was born. The atmosphere in the convent became stifling. Intersections broke by themselves, statues of saints turned their backs, and in some corridors there was an unusually cold, even under the African sun. The sisters began to fear walking alone at night, as footsteps, whispers, and distorted laughter echoed from the empty rooms. The chapel bell rang on its own, always at 3 in the morning. 2 nuns, shaken by fear, left the convent. It was then that the ecclesiastical superiors of the region decided to act. 2 experienced priests were summoned, Reverend Mansueti and Father Erasmus. Both arrived on missions prepared for the worst, but not even their years of faith and study could prepare them for what they would witness. The exorcism lasted 2 days in a row, in intense sessions marked by animalistic screams and blasphemies that made the floor of the chapel tremble. Clara laughed derisively, spat on the priest's robes, and once vomited a black, viscous mixture with the smell of rotting flesh. Its body bent at impossible angles, and its tongue sometimes elongated like that of a reptile. A smell of sulfur pervaded everything, and flies seemed to appear out of nowhere, buzzing incessantly around its bed. During the early hours of the morning, Father Erasmus claimed to have seen for a moment Clara's eyes glow bright red. When he tried to get closer, she growled and pushed him with such violent force that the priest was thrown against the wall, losing consciousness. At the end of the second day, during a prayer in Latin, Claire let out one last scream, a high-pitched, prolonged sound that shattered the chapel's windows. Then he fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up, he didn't remember anything. She was weak, her body covered in wounds and bruises, but lucid. Evil, apparently, had left. Despite having survived, Clara was never the same again. He remained in the convent for a few more years, but rarely spoke. It was said that sometimes she would murmur to herself, staring into space. Her health deteriorated, and she died young, before she turned 22. Some say it was because of the exorcism sessions. Others believe that the devil never left her completely. Today, the mission of São Miguel no longer exists. It was deactivated decades later, and its ruins still rest under the tall vegetation. There are those who avoid the region. Fishermen and hunters swear they hear screams coming from the forest at dusk, and among the older ones, there is the story of a young woman who one day defied the forces of hell, and he lost something more than sanity. The Enfield Affair, England, 1977-1978, Enfield, North London, 1977, an ordinary street in a working-class neighbourhood marked by terraced houses and modest gardens. But 284 Green Street would soon cease to be just another British residence. In a short time, the place would become the epicenter of one of the most disturbing supernatural cases of the 20th century, a story that involved the police, the press, paranormal researchers, and, above all, a terrified family. It all started on a cold August night. Peggy Hodgson, a single mother of 4, was woken up by the screams of Janet, her 11-year-old daughter. She said that her bed was shaking. At first, Peggy thought it was a child's nightmare, but that same night, she heard violent knocking coming from the walls of the children's room. When he entered, he saw the dresser move on its own, sliding across the floor until it blocked the door. As he tried to push her back, he realized that something was holding her back, as if invisible hands were holding her tightly. In the following days, the phenomena multiplied. The beats became more rhythmic, as if someone was trying to communicate. Objects flew, toys broke on their own, and a strange mist appeared in the hallway during the night. The children began to report whispers and voices that seemed to come from beyond. Janet, in particular, began to exhibit strange behaviors. She was found in unnatural positions, with rolled eyes, and said things she did not remember later. Once, neighbors claimed to have seen her floating 3 feet off the ground, her arms open and her face contorted in pain. The press soon arrived. The Daily Mirror newspaper was the first to cover the case and even photographed objects in full motion. The team also witnessed furniture being thrown without explanation. But it was paranormal investigators Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair from the Society for Psychical Research who dove deep into the case, spending months in the house and recording dozens of phenomena. One of the most frightening, the deep voice that came out of Janet's throat, identifying himself as Bill Wilkins, a man who would have died in that house years earlier after suffering a hemorrhage in the living room. The sessions were recorded. On the tapes, Janet, a slight child, spoke in a guttural masculine voice, alternating between obscene laughter and threats. Sometimes the voice said that he didn't want to leave, that this was his home. The tapes were analyzed by experts who concluded that it was not possible for a child to produce such deep sounds without damaging the vocal cords. And even after long periods of speaking in that voice, Janet was unharmed. Police officers called to the scene also witnessed the inexplicable. An agent reported seeing a chair slide across the room without anyone touching it. She signed an official statement. The children's school reported that Janet began to exhibit obsessive behaviors, sometimes thrashing on the floor as if she were possessed, with force disproportionate to her size. As the months passed, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Pictures fell from the walls, a Bible was found torn to pieces, and strange symbols appeared scratched on the mirrors. The sound of fingernails scratching the wood echoed through the night, and always at 2:45 a.m. a ghoulish laugh crossed the corridors, making the residents shudder. The family, exhausted, began to sleep on mattresses in the living room, trying to stay together to protect themselves. Janet was even taken to a psychiatric hospital for a few weeks, but the phenomena continued even in her absence, indicating that something deeper involved the entire house. After almost 2 years of suffering, events ceased as suddenly as they began. The house was sold years later, but the new residents never stayed long. Neighbors still report strange noises coming from inside, although the residence seems empty. Some nights, a silhouette is said to be seen through the window of Janet's room, motionless, watching passers-by. The Enfield case remains unexplained. Many believe in a farce devised by children. Others swear that there was a royal possession there. But one thing is certain, those who delved too deeply into this case did not come out the same, and those who listened to the tapes assures that Bill's voice still whispers in dreams. And you, would you dare to listen? The Possession of Emma Schmidt, Germany, 1928. It was the year 1928. The First World War had left deep scars in Europe, and the climate in Germany was one of tension and transition. In an isolated Bavarian village surrounded by dense, humid forests, a 32-year-old woman named Emma Schmidt, also known in church records as Anna Eklund, would be the center of one of the most disturbing cases of demonic possession ever recorded by the Catholic Church. Emma lived a simple life, devout, silent. She attended Mass frequently and was respected by the community. However, since the age of 14, strange episodes had been accumulating. It began with a sudden revulsion at religious objects, crossings, rosaries, sacred images. Everything caused a visceral reaction in her, vomiting, screaming, or fainting. Later, voices arose in her mind, and a growing sense of being constantly watched by something she didn't see but felt in every dark corner of the house. Gradually, his personality began to change. Emma became aggressive, with fits of rage during prayers, and had memory lapses in which she claimed not to remember what she had done in the last few hours. Their eating became erratic. Once, she was caught voraciously devouring insects, and then stared at others with a smile that didn't look human. Reports say that she spoke to herself in unknown tongues, and that her voice changed to something deep and guttural, incompatible with the body of a thin woman. The situation has reached an unsustainable point. The church was called, and Father Theophilus Riesinger, an experienced exorcist, was called from America, as Emma had emigrated to the US in her youth, although she had returned to Germany months before the case exploded. The exorcism was authorized in secret and conducted in a secluded convent away from the public eye, where nuns sealed doors and windows with crucifixes. From the first moment, the phenomena were intense. Emma screamed when she saw the priest, even though she didn't know who he was. The atmosphere of the convent changed. The corridors became cold, the candles went out without wind, and whispers began to echo through the nights. During the exorcism, she spat out metal objects such as nails and needles that could not have been in her stomach without punctures. His body levitated from the bed, folded upside down, and his skin gave off a putrid odor, like decaying flesh. The voice coming out of it identified itself as Judas, Lucifer, and other names that the priests refused to repeat. Emma mocked the prayers, spat on sacred icons, and spoke of hidden sins of those present, some of which were later confirmed with bewilderment. In one of the most frightening episodes, she screamed in Old Latin, and all the mirrors in the convent shattered at the same time, as if they had been hit by an invisible explosion. The exorcism lasted 23 days. The nuns reported that with each session, they felt weaker, as if something drained their energy. Some began to have violent nightmares, and 2 had to be removed after freaking out. Emma, between sessions, remained tied up in a state of semi-consciousness. He said he saw flaming eyes hovering over the ceiling and heard hands scratching the world on the other side. At the end of the last session, after a prayer in Latin and the imposition of a sacred relic on her forehead, Emma emitted a cry so loud and prolonged that it cracked the plaster of the wall behind her. Then her body collapsed, and she slept for almost 2 days. When he woke up, he cried compulsively, saying only, "He's gone, but others will come." Emma survived, but never spoke publicly about it. She lived in seclusion until her death decades later. The convent was abandoned years after the exorcism, following reports of nuns hearing footsteps, moans, and whispered prayers on the darkest nights. Some claim that to this day the relic used in the ritual remains stained, and that no one can touch it without experiencing intense nausea or vertigo. Official church records exist, but they have been kept away from the public for many years. Only in the inner circles of the Vatican is this case cited as one of the few in which the presence of evil has been absolutely confirmed. The name Emma Schmidt stands as a dark whisper among those who study the occult, a warning that sometimes hell doesn't need to be invoked. He just enters.